Hello, I'm Anthony Larson. In the next few minutes, we're going to explore some fascinating ideas in Scripture that you may not have noticed before, although they've always been there. It promises to be a journey of discovery and insight, so prepare yourself for what scientists call a paradigm shift. That's roughly a change of opinion. You're about to see history and prophecy as you've never seen them before. One of the strangest events recorded in Scripture is found in the Old Testament book of Joshua, and it's called, appropriately, the Long Day of Joshua. Occasionally, we all have long days that never seem to end, but Joshua's really was long, almost a whole extra day long. How, you say? Well, first, let's get a better perspective of Joshua's time by looking back in Hebrew history. The Exodus was over, and so was Israel's 40-year wandering in the desert. The mantle of leadership passed to Joshua, and Moses was taken from among them. With Joshua as their new leader, Israel was now conquering the promised land. In the book of Joshua, chapter 10, we get to the heart of it. Here we read of a battle between Joshua's army and the Amorites. This engagement would have been no different than any other if it were not for a rather peculiar request that Joshua made of God. Verse 12 reads, "Then spake Joshua to the Lord, and he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou moon in the valley of Ajalon. So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven, and hasted not to go down about a whole day." Needless to say, if events occurred as recorded here in the Old Testament, then something happened that you and I don't see every day. But exactly what did happen has puzzled people for thousands of years. Much speculation surrounds these few verses because the implied possibility that the earth stopped turning is utterly unthinkable to most people. They believe it must have been an illusion. Scientists like the popular astronomer Carl Sagan tell us that if the earth suddenly stopped turning, cars, houses, trees, and of course people would suddenly go flying off into space. The earth would simply be torn apart. So we look for alternatives. Perhaps they saw an eclipse, or maybe a bright passing comet simply looked like the sun. Maybe it was some rare atmospheric phenomenon, or perhaps the light from a distant nova arrived at the earth at just that moment. Whatever it was, something other than what Joshua thought happened, happened. But that leaves us in a bit of a quandary, doesn't it? On the one hand, we're taught to believe that a prophet cannot lie, even a lesser one like Joshua. So the earth must have stopped turning, right? Well, on the other hand, our enlightened scientific understanding and our logical, rational minds tell us that such a thing cannot happen without utterly destroying the earth. So what are we to believe? Well, the usual response to this dilemma is to speculate, as we just did, about what phenomena might have created the illusion that the earth stopped turning. Or we might simply note that the prophet Joseph Smith declared the Old Testament to be full of translation errors, and this must surely be one of them. So what do we believe? Did the earth really stop rotating for several hours, as Joshua wrote? Or was it some other natural phenomenon that only made it look that way? Or is the account itself corrupted? Well, just when we backed ourselves into a corner, along comes the cavalry. In this case, the Book of Mormon. As with so many other questions, this book holds the answer to the mystery of Joshua's long day. But first let me ask, do you believe this book is correct? Does it contain any falsehoods? The truth is, no good Latter-day Saint can say that the Book of Mormon is flawed. The Lord has even declared in modern revelation, "As your Lord and your God liveth, it is true." Joseph Smith said that it's the most correct book, so we must accept what's written in the Book of Mormon. Keeping all that in mind, let's turn to Helaman chapter 12, verses 8 through 17. It's here that Mormon describes and explains plainly what must have happened in the days of Joshua. "For behold, the dust of the earth moveth hither and thither to the dividing asunder at the command of our great and everlasting God. The hills and the mountains tremble and quake. They are broken up and become smooth, yea, even like unto a valley. Yea, by the power of his voice doth the whole earth shake. The foundations rock even to the very center. Yea, and if he say unto the earth, Move, it is moved." Now pay close attention to this. "Yea, if he say unto the earth, Thou shalt go back, that it lengthen out the day for many hours, it is done. And thus according to his word, the earth goeth back. And it appeareth unto man that the sun standeth still. Yea, and behold, this is so. For surely it is the earth that moveth, and not the sun." This is the finest, plainest astrophysical dissertation in all of Scripture. As Nephite prophets were wont to do, Mormon spoke plainly. There is no metaphor here, no symbolism, nor is it a theoretical construct. It is a straightforward declaration of the facts. So what does it tell us? That the long day of Joshua happened, just as Joshua told it. The Earth's rotation can be halted and apparently restarted without destroying everything. Strange turn of events, right? Mind you, here's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. What do you think of this? Can you accept that such things can occur? Or are there still doubts? As one who has an unshakable witness of the restored gospel and the calling of the prophet Joseph Smith, I tell you that a primary message of the gospel and the prophets is that such things do occur. Well, since Mormon says that it can happen, let's look more closely at this phenomenon to see if we can understand how it happens. First of all, we know that the Earth rotates at about 1,000 miles per hour at the equator, less as you move towards the poles. Now, when most people think of stopping the Earth, they think of it coming to a sudden jolting halt. But consider this. What if the Earth stopped turning in the space of 2 or 3 hours? Would we feel it then? The answer is no. A few simple calculations tell us that a 2-hour deceleration period would require, at the most, a reduction of about 8 miles per hour each minute. Gradual deceleration in such tiny increments would be virtually imperceptible to you and me. But the secondary effects would be pronounced. This world, disrupted in its rotation, would reverberate with precisely those manifestations listed by Mormon. The halting of the Earth would cause tremendous lateral shearing forces, such as those that created these. Mormon wrote that there would be earthquakes. The hills and the mountains tremble and quake. Doth the whole earth shake? the foundations rock even to the very center. Tremendous lateral forces would cause crustal shifting. We read that they, the mountains, would be broken up and become smooth, yea, even like unto a valley. Or, mountain, be thou raised up. And the same lateral motions would incite oceanic migrations. God said, waters of the great deep, be thou dried up. That is, oceans appear to dry up because they temporarily migrate out of their beds. Although Mormon did not mention it, we would expect to see atmospheric disturbances. Fierce cyclones and tornadoes would be born in an atmosphere terribly distorted by Earth's altered rotation. In reality, all these phenomena are simply manifestations of one single event, the Earth's slowed or stopped rotation. So there are important details that naturally belong in the prophet's discussion of such an event. Bear that in mind as we proceed. These phenomena must accompany such an event. They are an unavoidable physical consequence of Earth's altered rotation. One other element can be added to this list by re-examining Joshua's account. In verse 10 of chapter 10, he wrote, "The Lord cast down great stones from heaven upon them, so much so that they were more which died with hailstones than they whom the children of Israel slew with the sword." The Hebrew word translated as hailstones by the King James translators is barad, B-A-R-A-D. In Habakkuk, in the Old Testament, it was translated as hot coals and would be even more accurately rendered hot stones. Of course, in modern terms, hot stones that fall to the earth from the sky are called meteorites. However, in the days of King James, scientists and scholars believed that it was impossible for hot stones to fall from the sky. The only stones from heaven that they knew of were hailstones. So that's the term they used when translating the scriptures. But we today would call them meteorite showers. And these meteorite showers accompanied the stopped earth event according to Joshua. Now, reflect for a moment. What other ancient Old Testament event can you recall that speaks of hailstones falling out of the sky, of earthquake and shifting sea, and so on? Right, the Exodus, a mere 40 years before Joshua's long day. Could it be that something very different was going on in that epoch? Remember how, when Pharaoh refused to let the Israelites go, God sent down many plagues? One of these was a plague of hailstones, or better said, hot stones, as we've seen. And here the more correct hot stones translation makes perfect sense because Moses wrote that the hail in Egypt was accompanied by fire. Imagine that. But there was far more going on than hot stones and fire raining out of the sky. Besides the items we found in Helaman and Joshua, we can add several other strange phenomena from Exodus to our list. Let's see, there was water that turned red, water turned to blood, plagues of vermin, maggots, flies, frogs, and so forth, death of the firstborn during Passover, darkness, thunder and lightning with the earthquakes, and a pillar of fire and smoke, just to name a few. Before reading Mormon, we might have thought that some of these observations by Moses were mere exaggerations or perhaps metaphorical allusions to local events. But now we must re-examine our perception of them. Were they real? Were they worldwide? What was going on? And what caused it? Well, to answer those questions, let's make another startling connection. The familiar plagues of the Exodus are found, of all places, in the book of Revelation. You probably never noticed it before, so let me point out a couple of examples. First, from Exodus. "And all the waters that were in the river were turned to blood, and there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt." Next, Revelation. "And the second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man. The third angel poured out his vial upon the rivers and fountains of water, and they became blood." Do you see the parallel? Exodus again. And the Lord sent thunder and hail, and the fire ran along the ground. Now, Revelation. And there followed hail and fire mingled with the blood, and they were cast upon the earth. Surprised? These are only two of many such parallels between the two books. Look them up for yourself. But these parallels are stunning when you stop to think about it. Isn't Revelation about the last days? And Exodus is history, right? Well, that's the connection that I wanted you to make. Both books are talking about identical types of events, one over 3,000 years ago, the other yet to come. It appears that the last days will see a rerun, if you will, of the Exodus destructions. There it is. As strange as these things sound when we speak of the past, they're stranger still when we consider them to be part of the future. But the most amazing part is yet to come. Let's turn to Revelation and read what John wrote about the cause of these catastrophes, what it is that stops the earth, showers meteorites and fire upon the earth, raises mountains, moves oceans around, and wreaks havoc the world over. In verse 10 of chapter 8 we read, "And there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the rivers and upon the fountains of waters." A star? Could a distant star cause these things? Again in chapter 9, verse 1, John wrote, "And I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth." There's that star again. What John seems to be saying here is that a star will have something to do with the strange phenomenon we've been reading about. In fact, he points to the star as the cause of the water turning to blood. And here's another parallel. In the book of Acts, Exodus is connected to a star. Now, understand, in ancient parlance, the term star can be applied to any celestial body. A comet or a planet will do as nicely as a star. After all, they all look about the same to an earthly observer. The important point to gather here is that events like Joshua's long day, or the Exodus plagues, or Revelation's latter-day calamities are all caused by extraterrestrial bodies. No? Sound far-fetched? Well, let's read what Joseph Smith had to say about the last days. "There will be signs in the heavens above and on the earth beneath, the sun turned into darkness and the moon to blood, earthquakes in diverse places, the seas heaving beyond their bounds." Well, those are the same things we've been talking about, right? But he goes on to pinpoint the cause. "Then will appear one grand sign of the Son of Man in heaven. But what will the world do? They will say, it is a planet, a comet, and so forth." A planet? A comet? Could this be John's star? Was the great pillar of fire and smoke of the Exodus really a planet-sized comet, head and tail standing vertically on the horizon? In light of Joshua's experience, Mormon's amazing statements, and John's prophetic declarations, who can doubt what Joseph Smith was talking about? He even associated several of the secondary phenomena with the principal cause. That is, he associated the heavenly signs, the moving water, the earthquakes, and the darkness with the planet or comet. Though he didn't elaborate on this idea in print, many early saints and brethren report similar statements by the prophet Joseph Smith. Now, this we know, a comet or planet moving far from the earth could cause no such damage. Joseph Smith's statement clearly implies a close pass, or a near miss, if you will. In 1950, an eminent scholar named Emanuel Velikovsky first proposed that a comet-like, planet-sized body moving close to the Earth could cause the kind of destructive phenomena we've been talking about. He claimed that the debris from the tail, together with the gravitational and electromagnetic effects of the passing body, caused the events recorded in Scripture, as in Exodus and Joshua. Ironically, Dr. Velikovsky used the same two words to describe the destructive star of the Exodus as Joseph Smith used to describe the grand sign of the last days, comet and planet. I believe they used identical terms because they were describing nearly identical events, one historic, the other prophetic. Now, let's look at one more piece of evidence. When John wrote of a star causing all these signs, he touched upon a fascinating point of history. In antiquity, there was a primary goddess worshipped by virtually every ancient civilization. She was known universally as the Queen of Heaven, but she went by many names, each from a different culture. She was known as Aster, Astarte, Ashtoreth, Ishtar, Hathor, and so forth. Now, notice that each of these names share a common root, which in English became the words star and astro. Considering that bit of etymology, what do you think gave rise to the worship of this ancient Queen of Heaven? Apparently, the gods and goddesses of antiquity were inspired in the minds of men by celestial apparitions. Call them comets, or planets, or stars. So the prophets were right. Star is the proper word. Even the English words for the kind of super destructive planet-wide events we've been talking about retain this same root. Consider the words catastrophe and disaster. What do you think was the agent behind the worst kind of destruction imaginable? One interpretation of the word disaster is literally from the star. The key remains in our language. It was astro-destruction, ruin from the stars. No wonder ancient men watched, implored, and even worshipped celestial bodies. So, as we've seen, Joshua's long day really was long. The earth actually stopped turning. Latter-day Saints cannot question Joshua's claim thanks to the clarity of the Book of Mormon. And accepting that truth opens wide the door to new insights into history and prophecy. We must consider the possibility, as Mormon plainly wrote, that these things do happen. Otherwise, why would John speak of a star causing these woes, as he called them? Or why would Joseph Smith talk about a comet or planet, if such were not true? Read Revelation, or Isaiah, or even the Doctrine and Covenants with this new point of view. The eyes of your understanding will be opened, believe me. It's always been there in your scriptures, but now you'll see things you've never seen before. Your view of the scriptures, history and prophecy, will be forever changed.